So what are power rankings? Power rankings are basically our way of evaluating the decks in the cube. So all 6 of us took 5 decks as well as an honorable mention and ranked them as well. So we all have our top 5s that we're bringing to the table. And then at the very end, all of those rankings are going to get combined into a final aggregate ranking, which I'm going to ask Connor to explain more. Connor, can you explain more with how that aggregate ranking works and what really makes this power rankings?
Yeah, absolutely. So the aggregate ranking is the ultimate ranking that is the combined total of everyone. So once every participant in the video or the stream gives their top 5 with their honorable mention, then I tally them all up. I take the average rating of everybody. No placement is a 10. So if somebody doesn't show up on a list, then they get a 10 for that placement, and then that all gets averaged up, and the person with the lowest score is the highest ranking, and so on. So in this case, it is between 3 and 6 as the average makes it into the aggregate. In some cases, you would need like a 3. So it really just depends on how spread out our rankings are. But essentially, the aggregate ranking is the total, the culmination of everybody's rankings on the stream.
Perfect. Yep. So just so you guys are aware of how this works, and basically when we get to the very end, now you know what to expect. So the order we're going to be going in is starting from the top of Best Pal Al, Davi, myself, Mike Gibbs, Slight, and then C. Kreckler. We're going to start with honorable mentions first. Everyone's going to have a turn to say what deck they chose for their category. Once we get to the end of each category, we're going to leave the floor open to you guys. So participants can ask each other questions, but you also can get involved in the conversation. So if you're watching this live on Twitch, you can, and if you have any questions or any comments you'd like to say about the power rankings you're watching right now, please let us know. We'll answer in the chat as we see questions or any insightful feedback you want to give. So feel free to get a part of the conversation. But we're going to kick things off right with Best Pal Al and his first pick. So Al, when you're ready, take it away.
So for my honorable mention, I've chosen Zach's Fire Colorless deck, I want to say. I really wanted to put this in my top 5, but the main reason it's not there is the main attackers are Blaziken and Charizard, from what I make out. And they are both very energy-hungry attackers. When you attack with them, you have to discard energy to really utilize them to their full potential. And I just think the deck might struggle to have multiple attackers set up at once. It might be difficult to have a follow-up attacker when your EX is knocked out. So that's why it's not in there, but it's my honorable mention because it's got some really good stuff going for it. So we've got the Quick Search Pidgeot, which is probably the best consistency support Pokemon in the cube. Just every turn searching for any card and putting it in your hand. There's the Roast Reveal Ninetales, discard a fire, draw 3 cards, combining with the Smooth Over Macago, where once during your turn you can put a card from your deck on top of your deck. So the consistency is there. The only thing that I would like to see more of is maybe one, I don't know, an attacker that doesn't discard energy to do stuff, basically. But apart from that, it's great. So passing it over to Debbie.
Hello. So I have as my horrible mention Quality Time Grover's deck. This deck is control or die. This deck has no second plan. It is going to control you to death. And this is very strong. This cube, I think its control is basically weaker than in other cubes because you, like, if we can think about, if you put a Clado in the active, if you like gust a Clado to the active and your opponent can retreat, in a normal cube, you're screwed. You can't retreat your Clado, so it's stuck there. In this cube, you can evolve to stage 2s. You can do that with like all sorts of stage 1 support Pokemon. So I think control is not that strong in this cube, but still, this list is super strong, has so much consistency. I would not be surprised if this deck goes like top 8, top 4, top 2, or if it wins the event. I think this is a very, very good list. And Grover, back to you.
All right. So apologies for my dogs running in the background, but my honorable mention is Tomo, the DCE King. If you guys watched the live streams, he got so much consistency with the 3 DCEs and the special charge, and he has so many good attackers to use it with the Armaldo, with the Kingdra. Honestly, I wish he had more draw supporters or more consistency in the draw supporter range. But I'm very excited for this deck. I didn't quite know where to rank it, so I thought maybe honorable mention would be the good place to start, and hopefully he can surpass my expectations and really run the field. But I am excited for this deck. He got so many good attackers with the Flygon EX, like I said, the Armaldo. So lots of stuff to look forward to. I'm really excited to see where he goes with this. So I'm going to pass it off to Mike now to let him talk about his honorable mention.
All right. Thank you. For my honorable mention, I chose a non-evolution deck, basically. So I like this deck because it doesn't evolve, which is the gimmick of this cube is evolving, and it doesn't really evolve, which is interesting. But it's actually pretty good. It can definitely tempo some people pretty quickly with the fire starter, and Fellow Boost Latias is a super strong attacker. And the drop support with this deck is super good. So as long as it doesn't get like power locked or something like that, it should draw pretty well every game and can just out consistency people. And with EXP Share, it should be able to chain attack pretty well. And with the burning energy also, this deck can definitely chain attacks very well and is super strong. I just really like that it doesn't really use the gimmick of the Q, which is interesting. So yeah, that's why it's my honorable mention. All right, passing it over to Slight.
Yeah, so my honorable mention is Davi's Delta Circle Again deck. So this deck is really neat. It can Delta Circle both on the Executor and the Ampharos Delta for huge damage for just 2 energy with 3 double colorless. It's very, very easy to get those attacks off. I love some of the stall potential going on in here with the Muck EX, How Hand Extension, the Crobats, and even the Beedrill can be used to buy time. Just tons and tons of ways to keep the opponent from doing what they want to do. The big thing that makes me hesitant about this deck is that the strategy is a little bit fragile in the sense that it does rely fairly heavily on Ampharos Delta being in play, at least by the mid game. Doesn't necessarily have to in the very early game because he can go into other attackers like the Crobat to lead things off. But it does eventually need that Ampharos to push through. And there are only 9 basic Pokemon in the deck, which means after a couple go down, then you have to start recovering Pokemon, anything that gets knocked out, if you want to be able to maximize your damage output. So those are the reasons why it's not in my top 5, why it's just in my honorable mentions. But I do think this deck is incredibly scary, and I would not be surprised to see it do very, very well. And with that, I will pass it on to Zach.
All right, so for my honorable mention, I also picked Grover's deck. This deck is kind of ridiculous. I'm also not entirely sure if Control will, do enough to win, which is why it's not in my top 5. But you really have to just respect the utter consistency of this deck. Like most of the time, you get like one, Porygon or Macargo or something like that. You're feeling pretty good. This deck has Macargo, it has Milotic, it has Porygon 2, it has the other Porygon 2, and it has Pidgeot. So it's kind of just like all of them. He should be getting whatever card you want at any time, which is utterly ridiculous. The whole Salamence slacking combo I think is really good. If you can just lock something up, shut off powers. Powers are pretty heavily used in this cube, so I think would not be surprised to see it do well. I wouldn't want to play against a Metacham EX with this deck, but just for the utter obscene amount of consistency, I picked this as my honorable mention.
All right, so we are going to be wrapping that up with the list of everyone's picks here. So we have, starting with Al, we have Expensive Dot Deck, which is Z Crackler's Quality Time with Davi. It's my deck. My pick with Tomo with DC King, Mike with Big Basics for Poke, Slight with the Delta Circle from Davi, and then, of course, Zach also with my deck with Quality Time. So something I wanted to comment on, because I saw it in the chat, it looks like 2 people had, 2 decks have access to 3DC, which is kind of ridiculous. I mean, it's kind of, that happens, but that's really cool to see that Tomo isn't the only DC key. He's a little bit contested here. So any thoughts from anyone on the call that you want to bring up on any decks you were surprised about or anything you want to say. The floor is now open.
3 DCE should not happen. It should just not be possible in this cube. To answer a question in the chat that I see, you are not allowed to pick yourself. So none of the participants in this are allowed to pick their own deck. That has been the way that we've done it for a few rankings now. So just clear that up real quick. But yeah, 3 DCE is not fair. I think you have to be very lucky with unpacking them or having people next to you unpacking extremely powerful cards like Pidgeot. Very, very few cards I would let through over DCE. So that just instantly elevates your deck to another tier.
Mm-hmm. And I do think that DC King is the DC King. I think his deck is better than mine, for sure. But I'm pretty sure my DCs will all pick 1 or 2 on the pack. Like, there's no way that DC gets passed onto like pick 4 or 5. It's impossible in this cube. It's such a good card, and we'll see that many of the top decks have at least 1 DC, I think. So yeah.
Yeah, I do agree with that. And some of the distinctions in my ratings were definitely based on whether the deck did have access to DCE, just to be able to either go aggressive or bounce back at some point in the game when the opponent takes a knockout. So definitely something that everyone would be happy to have. And it's a big thing that will influence the pace of the game.
All right. Any other thoughts before we move on? Or we're going to hit right into the top 5. All right. Well, so without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Al now to talk about his top 5 pick from this league. So take it away, Al.
All right, so my number 5 pick is Blue's Chicory and Powell's deck. I really like this deck. He's got the Dark Electrode, Dark Dragonite combo, where every turn he can search his deck for a Dark Energy, attach it to Electrode, and the Dragonite lets it move the energy wherever he needs it to go. The reason this has made my top 5 primarily is the sheer amount of damage counter manipulation Blue's managed to get. So he's got the Chicory EX, which I think is insane in this cube. Whenever your opponent's Pokemon uses a power, put 2 damage counters on it. He's also got 2 Absols, the Absol and the Absol EX, and that lets him move 3 damage counters from one of his opponent's Pokemon to another one. So normally you can play around the Chicory EX if you're using your support Pokemon, say your Pidgeot. You use it just enough times to the point where it's not getting knocked out from the Dark Eyes Pokebody that the Chicory has. But Blue's got potential to really just move those damage counters off of those support Pokemon, move them onto the support Pokemon, all these powers that are coming into play in this cube. He's got the Zigzagoon and the Crobat G to go with that, just to add even more damage counters to the board. The Chicory EX in itself is a great attacker. It can snipe 50 damage anywhere if they're already damaged, and he's got so many ways to get damage on the board. I just think he'll be hitting the numbers he needs to hit to take knockouts every turn. He can move damage counters off of the active if he's doing more damage than he needs to, which will make future knockouts a lot easier to set up. So yeah, I think this deck's really good. And the Delta Raichu as well, just to really punish Pokepowers and Pokebodies. It hurts his field of Pokemon a lot as well. But it's unlikely his opponent will have the same sniping and damage counter manipulation that I think this deck provides. So yeah, passing on to Davy.
Thank you. I have the DC King as my top 5 deck. I think this deck is very good. If you see all of his attackers use DC, like Armaldo, Flygon, Kingdra, he also has a lot of like cute combos. He has a Lana's Fishing Rod to reuse a Giantscape or Rocky Helmet. And there's a card here that's super underrated on cubes, the Flygon EX, that has Psychic Protector, that when it gets damaged, you can discard up to 4 cards from your hand and make the attack do -40 or -10 or -20. And if you have a giant cape on that, this card is not going to die easily. Like, this guy is gonna be there for a while. And I think this deck is just really, really good. It's not on my like top 2 or top 3 just because it doesn't have Medicham EX. It's one of the linchpin cards for the fighting deck. And I think the energy counts, even with the 3DC and the counter energy, it's a bit too low. It's only, I think, 11 energy and 2 special charge. I tested 2 special charge with my 3DC deck, and I think it's a bit greedy to run that. I hope he doesn't get like energy shorted in most of his games, because this deck is super strong. And yeah, that's it. Passing on to Grover.
All right, thanks, Davi. So my number 5 pick is Odysseus' Cursed Stone deck, which does feature a copy of Cursed Stone, believe it or not. But it has a lot of other really good cards too. I really like the tankiness of this deck. That Kindred EX is so strong at tanking hits, as well as he has access to the Metasham EX, and that shuts off Poke Powers in the active. So it is really good at locking decks at the same time. I've been really waiting to see some really strong fighting decks come out of this cube, especially out of past drafts. I haven't seen a lot from the archetype now, and I feel like they're really coming out at this point. So he's got a lot of really good attackers. He's got the strong energy as well to boost that damage. Just tons of good things to hear about this deck. My only issue is like I just feel like the decks I ranked above it are better. I know that sounds obvious, but it's like I have a hard time finding issue with most of these decks. It's just I feel like the power level of the decks ahead of my picks are at a little bit of a higher grade. So I don't really find much issue with this list. I mean, he's got a lot of consistency going for him. He's got the 3 transceiver, which is really good. I do wish he had a little bit more draw supporters, but he does have really good quality of draw supporters with the admin, with the chorus. But that said, I do think he is also able to cover his resistances really well with the Runes of Alph. I feel like that's something we don't see a lot in these decks, is a way to deal with resistance. So really hoping he does well. I think he won his first round, so he should be off to a strong start. I'm excited to see more of this deck. So that's all said. I'm going to pass it off to Mike for his pick.
All right, thank you. I have number 5 pick. I have Best Pal Owl. I really like the idea of this deck was Gyro Ball, just hit and running a lot. And using stuff like Speed Lightning Energy is probably like one of the best special energies in the cube. I can definitely draw through this deck pretty well to get the big guy set up like Muck EX, Vileplume EX, and with Gyro Ball, as long as it's not prize, it like what you do with the deck is you just put it in active, Gyro Ball, then you go into one of your big walls like Muck EX, Vileplume are very strong, and against like a lot of the DCE decks, you can just lock a Crystal Beach, and that could be really troublesome to deal with. And also with cards like Manectric EX, I could see this deck being very strong against a lot of the Scramble Energy, Double Rainbows, and DCE decks, as those energies don't even work against Crystal Beach. So yeah, the biggest like drawback of this deck is that if you're not locking that well, then it could be kind of bad. And also the support line's like average. It's decent but average. But yeah, I really like the idea of this deck, and I don't think we saw any other hit and run decks, so we'll just see how it does. So with that, I'm gonna pass it on to Slight.
All right. My number 5 pick is PG Pichu's ping dot deck. So the reason why I picked this deck is actually for a very similar reason as I believe Al picked Blue's deck, and that is because there are so many ways to add damage, but this deck actually has even more. So it only has the one Absol, but it does have the Grimsley to balance that out. It has the Shifter EX, but it has both of the Ampharos that can add extra damage counters. Jamming Ampharos, I think, is one of the strongest stage 2s in the cube, so that is an incredible asset. Very solid supporter quality with a really nice hole in engine, so great consistency. Really nice disruptive tools, too. The Dangerous Drill, the Enhanced Hammer are both very, very nice, as well as the Desert Ruins. In addition to all that, really nice dark support, and it has a Reverse Valley, 2 Vitality Band, and both special dark energies. So this deck can add so much damage. It is very reasonable for a Shifter EX to swing for 100 or more, and with all of the extra damage modification tools that are in this deck, I could totally see that being something that happens every single game. So this deck is really terrifying, gets knockouts out of nowhere, it's super fast, and I really like it. So that's why it's at my number 5. And I will pass it on to Zach.
All right, so for my number 5 picked, I have Benjamin Grove 47's Raichu Acceleration deck. I really like it just as far as a lightning deck goes. It's very consistent. His supporter quality is among the best of any of the decks in the cube that I've seen. I believe I counted 12 draw supporters, which is really good. And then he also has a solid amount of Pokemon search. So just from that, I feel like he should be able to get his battle plan going pretty quickly. And if he can get his battle plan going pretty quickly, then this is a deck that can threaten one-hit KOs very easily. There's a ton of potential with the Raichu EX, obviously, doing 3 for 120. But then Charizard with Metal Burn, and then Crush and Burn Metagross itself. All 3 of these can easily take knockouts. And then he also has other strategies he can use, though, if that's not something that's working out. He has hit and run with Magnezone. He can bounce back to something else. He can go tanky with the Raichu EX, especially with Holen Energy GL as well. So that can potentially be reducing 40 a turn from EXs while he's setting up the board for other things. He can go quick with, if he managed to go turn 1, Shanks into something, or manages to rare candy quickly into Magnezone, turn 2 Zapdos EX, which that was popular back in 05, bringing it back here. And the other thing I really like about this is how well his attackers diversify their weaknesses. So Charizard, it's weak to water. Metagross, weak to fire. Magnezone's weak to fighting. Same as the Raichu. And then if he does go against fighting, he also has this nice 1/1/1 Metagross, which I don't think he needs it for the acceleration, but if he does get it out, then that means he's using Raichu every turn and doesn't have to, do anything crazy. I don't think it's necessary, but then that's another attacker that can one-shot a Metacham EX or something like that. So overall, I think this deck is really solid, and I would not be surprised to see it do well.
All right, very nice. So rounding out the cast here, you can see the top 5 with um, Blue Shiftry and Pal, Tomo DC King, Odysseus Curstone, Vespal's Green Lemon, PGPichu's Ping Dot Deck, and Benjamin Grove's Raichu Acceleration. I feel like we've seen a lot of new names this round, particularly with PGPichu and Benjamin Grove, and I really like those decks that you guys outlined. I thought they were like really standout decks. So any thoughts on those from anybody else? Anything else you guys saw throughout that round that you want to bring up?
I do think I have 2 things to say about those decks. One is I really like how Mutant gets, like, the decks get so creative, and most cubes that we play are usually more archetype based and not like creativity based. And I would never think that a deck like PG Peaches would exist in a cube. It's so fun to see that list. And the second thing is that Hollow Energy does not work on EXs, so he cannot use it on Raichu EX.
Yep. Good point.
One other thing. Oh, my bad.
Oh no, go
one
for
other
it.
thing. The Raichu EX is a really nasty card in this cube. That thing is so good against so much of the format. Just being able to go 2 snipe for 30 if it doesn't have a power, and 50 if it does. The EX damage reduction is actually extremely relevant, and it even works on the bench, so you can't snipe at it, you can't warp point and gust or and poke at it. You have to get through it, and it's just such a scary card. I think it's one of the strongest stage ones in the cube, if not the strongest stage one, possibly behind Medicham EX. So just really, really strong. And that was one reason I really like Benjamin Grove's deck as well. It would probably be like my number 7-ish. Just because the ability to take advantage of that and then also combo up into the heavy hitters and the Delta Metagross and the Charizard and the other Raichu EX for one-hit knockouts is so scary. So really wanted to point that out. I think it's one of the best cards there is in the cube.
No, definitely good points. Anything else before we move forward with number 4?
Nope.
All right, cool. So we're gonna pass it off to Al for his number 4 pick. Take it away.
All right, so my number 4 pick is Odysseus' Cursed Stone deck. Andrew talked about this earlier, but I'll just add a couple of things why I also think it's so good. The Kingdra EX can recover the strong energy from the discard pile with its energy link attack, which is incredibly strong. And then he's got the Gardevoir Delta species, which has a great Poke power, which lets him move energy. I think it can also move special energy, so he can move that strong energy from attacker to an attacker, and really use it throughout the entire game. And the itself has some very good attack. I think the Ruins of Alph are essential for fighting decks like this. So I'm glad he's got those. And I think the Hariyama with Cursed Stone play can just outright beat a lot of the decks because they're so reliant on powers. So I'll pass it to Davy.
Thank you. I have Blue's Shifter and Pulse deck for many of the same reasons that I don't remember who had it before, but it's basically what they said. It's a lot of damage counter potential. I think Nidoking is super good in this deck. 60-20 in this format is super underrated. And if you can get like a 70-20, sorry, with Special Dark, this card is nasty with all of the damage counter manipulations, and it's one of the best parts of this deck. Like a Nidoking active and a Shiftry on the bench is super scary for anything else to go against. And I think that's it. The deck is super great. It will. I don't like the lack of recovery options. I think Calm Farmer is the only one there. Like this deck with one Pokemon Retriever would be such a stronger deck, but this is very good, and I think Blue will go very far on this league. And passing over to Grover.
All right, thank you. So my number 4 is Mysterious Player's Energy Draw deck. So Energy Draw being the Energy Draw Delicati, but he also has access to Rosh Reveal Ninetales. But that's just like one part of the deck. I really like how he split into like a fire water. Like he covers different sides of his weakness very well here because the Kingdra and the Feraligatr are weak to grass, as well as Swampert. And the Glaceon's also weak to metal, so then he covers all the weaknesses with the fire types he has. I was really thinking Kingdra EX would be a really strong card in this cube, especially if he has it in conjunction with Return Wave, Vaporeon, so he can basically attach an energy and then chip out damage from them and also take energy off each turn. So it can be really annoying for some decks to deal with, especially if they don't have an engine to really combat that. But he has tons of tools at his disposal. He's got many ways to win the game. I thought this deck was a really standout pick. I wish he had a little bit more draw supporter lines. But he does have access to so much energy draw. The only thing that I always worry about is you want to make sure that you aren't discarding all of your energy with energy draw. You do need to attach those, but he does have ways to get them back. But overall, a very strong deck. I think all the decks that are going to be listed from here on out, I mean, all the decks in general that are on this table are going to be just really strong contenders. So it's really hard to draw the line somewhere. I can't tell if this should be maybe even a little bit higher, but I think for right where it's at, I'm really I think he's got a really solid foundation here, and I'm interested to see where he goes with it. So that's my top 4 pick. I'm gonna pass it off to Mike now.
All right, thank you. I have Zeke Clear's fire deck. I think this deck really stands out just because he can quick search for Blacksmith, attack, quick search for VX Seeker, Blacksmith, attack, and then just he has another VX Seeker on top of that. So he can just chain attacks that are like he can do so many like great attacks like Volcanic Ash, like every turn's not a big issue once he gets going. And there's so many good combos here that makes him do a ton of damage. Blaine's Arcanine, all the Charizards, Volcanic Ash, Power Crush, all those are excellent attacks that should get him a lot of one-shots. And I think like with Burning Energy, he can definitely like just chain a ton of one-shots that should win him a lot of games just based on tempo. And if you can't respond to his one-shots, you're just going to lose the game. The biggest problem with this deck that he could run into is just water decks, just because of weakness. Those could be a problem. Like, and I don't think there's too much you can do about it other than just like trade one-shots, which is it's viable, but
He does have a Racing Sound X Cloud.
Yeah, but
Shuts off weakness.
Yeah, that is true. But you do have to get that up. But I guess with that, yeah, that is a good point though. That the water decks aren't even that big of a deal. Was that point? So with the double reversal, he should be able to one shot so much stuff. I just think the one shotting is so good in this deck. He could have a problem setting up some games, but I don't think it'll be that big of an issue. So with that, I'll pass it over to Slate.
All right, so this round I have the DCE King Tomo-O. Watching this deck come together in the draft was just absolutely wild. Seeing all of the DCE and the special charge come in. This deck just has so many of the cube's best DCE attackers in the types, and fighting is a phenomenal type to be in with DCE because it has so many strong options. Armaldo EX so often is just going to be swinging 3 for 100 because it does swing 3 for 100 on anything that resists it. Flygon, very, very nice damage and stat line on a non-EX. Kingdra hits through resistance. And then the colorless lineup is very nice as well, slacking to shut off powers. Flygon EX is an amazing attacker because the double resistance, grass and lightning, it's just very, very uncommon to have those types resisted. And then in addition to that, just lots and lots of scary stuff, especially with the Pidgeot. One of my favorite cards in the cube is actually in this deck, and that's Clefable EX. And with 3 double colorless energy, Clefable EX is going to be able to one-shot any colorless weak Pokemon in the cube, which is so powerful, especially for a deck like this where you're in fighting. You might be worried about getting resisted by some of the Salamences that are weak to colorless. Clefable just comes up and one-shots them for 2 energy, which is so, so powerful. So this deck is absolutely fantastic, insane attacker quality, and I expect it to do very well. With that, I will pass it on to Zach.
All right, so for my number 4 pick, I have Vic's Pack 1 Pick 1 Strong Energy deck. This deck I think is really good. To start, the consistency is really solid. With he's got Claydol for Cosmic Power. He is Delcatty for Energy Draw, which has some really nice combos with his Regirock and his Milotic. So he has potential energy acceleration in fighting, which is normally not something you necessarily see in fighting, but I think is really strong here. His stage 2s are all really strong. Kingdra EX and we've gone over is why it's so good, but Nidoqueen is a very hard hitter. Kabutops and Armaldo are both solid and really good control cards, especially when he does have, strong energy, so they can hit even harder. His consistency base as far as supports and items is good. But the real thing I think is just going to destroy people with this deck is the combo he has here with Salamence and these control cards in Armaldo, Kabutops, and Metacham, and Admin. Like if you're playing into this deck and you're at the end, you got your one prize left, and all of a sudden you can't use his choice of abilities or supporters or trainers. He has whatever he wants active because of the Salamence, and you're at 1 card. That there's a ton of comeback potential there. So even if just the hard hitting fighting isn't working, there's always a backup plan with this deck. I do think it maybe could struggle some if like you can't get going super fast, but then you have that backup plan just to be ready to go. So based on all of that, I think the deck is very good, and which is why I have it as my number 4 spot.
All right. So just recapping here, we have Kirsten Odysseus' deck at Alice number 4, and then right on to Shiftry and Pals with blue, Energy Draw with Mysterious Player, Expensive Dot Deck with Z Crackler, DCE King with Tomo, and Pack 1 Pick 1 Strong Energy with Vic. I will say something I really appreciate about the decks that we've all listed here and we've talked about is that they all have like different modes of like winning the game. So like they all have very different board states they can get to, especially as Zach just pointed out with Vic's deck, which I completely overlooked some of that. Maybe would have ranked him higher, but I thought about more of the end game situations that he can get himself into. And I don't know if anyone else wants to speak to this, but like we've seen a lot of different decks with these alternate like or alternate ways to win the game. Do you think that's more prevalent with some of the more top tier decks than it is with the others?
So I think multiple modes or multiple advantages that they're pushing as far as control and one-shots and all that, they're just generally indicative of a very good cube deck. So if you can shut off access to some of your opponent's resources and you can grab an unexpected one-shot over here and you can pressure early over there, then like that just is a very, very powerful cube deck in general. And in a setting like Mutant, it's a lot easier to do that than normal. So whereas in a different cube, you might only see a couple of decks that can really push multiple advantages like that. in something like this, pretty much all of the best decks are going to have a couple of different advantages that they can push. So definitely a good point to bring up there.
I also feel like we've seen a lot of fighting this round, especially in the top list in general. I feel like fighting was kind of an utilized presence before. Mike, I kind of want to pass the question to you because you're like one of two of the cube builders for this cube. Did you anticipate fighting to have this much of a presence in the cube league?
I really didn't, because in the test cubes it wasn't that overwhelming. It went through a lot of changes, so I really didn't know if it would go one way or the other, to be honest. And it's surprising to see that this many top decks have fighting in it, to be honest. But like, if you told me before the league that there'd be a lot of fighting decks that were really good, I wouldn't be overwhelmingly surprised, because it went through a lot of changes, and it's interesting that it's definitely interesting that it's this high up in a lot of lists.
Yeah, you never can quite tell where any cube is going to go, especially during Cube League where there's so many iterations of the draft. So, very cool. Floor's open if anyone else has anything to say. If not, we'll move right along. So, quick 2 seconds. If anyone got anything to say, just let me know. Or otherwise, we'll move forward. All right, so we're going to go right with Al into his top 3. So, take it away.
All right, so I have chosen Vic's Pack 1, Pick 1 Strong Energy deck for my number 3. Mostly for the reasons Zach said earlier. So I won't go into too much detail. One cute little synergy I'll point out is the Delta Species Chime Echo with the Delcatty. He's got a pretty good Holon supporter line, Adventurer, Farmer, 2 Mentor, and the 2 Transceiver. So that's going to give him really good outs to Holon Mentor early in the game. He can be using these Holon supporters consistently throughout the game, which Chime Echo will allow him to recover a fighting energy back to his hand, which he can straight away discard it using Delcatty to draw 3 cards. So he's going to have no problem just drawing through his deck consistently, on top of the Claydol as well, of course. So yeah, I think the deck's really good. It's got a lot of comeback potential. It's got a good selection of stadiums, the Scorched Earth, just to get through the deck even quicker. And the Parallel City can really shut out a lot of decks that are reliant on bench space, because there's so many good powers in this cube. And I don't think the deck is that vulnerable to being power locked, whereas a lot of decks are. So he's got the Claydol and the Delcatty. You don't want those powers to be turned off, but it's not like your energy acceleration, which a lot of these decks rely on powers for energy acceleration. If that gets locked off, you often just slow down so much that it's hard to keep up. So I think this deck's got a good shot, and the Floatstone and Fluffy Berry with the Salamence means he can be gusting basically whenever one of his Pokemon's knocked out, which is incredibly powerful. So I'll pass it on to Dabby.
Thank you. So for number 3, I have Holland's Crush Draw, Vents deck. I have kind of an unpopular opinion on this cube. I think that decks that only work on Poké Powers, decks that would be very good in normal cubes, and we've seen some of those in the power rankings, they're not so great in this cube because there are so many instances of power lock and power abuse, like spreading with Kirsten. But I put Vents deck up there, and it is one of those decks, one of the power heavy decks, but I put it there because it also can function without the powers. Basically using Feraligatr EX. Like if you're ever fighting against like a Medicham EX or maybe a Muck, if you put Feraligatr EX active, that other card is going to cry before the Feraligatr, and you can start setting up your other attackers. If you ignore this Feraligatr, you're kind of screwed. And I put this over many of those other decks just as a lock is better than the other things in the cube. This can play super aggressive if it needs to. It has very, very high acceleration with the Tyranitar and Walring and the Swampert, the normal Swampert. So I like the different modes in like the fast one-shot to one-shot to one-shot matchup. I think this can get some advantages with the Feraligatr and even with like some locking cards like Latios EX. And that's basically it. I think this deck is super strong. And yeah, that's it. So passing over to Grover.
All right. So I guess I kind of have the antithesis deck. I have Zach Cook's Fire deck as my number 3. But I really think this deck's really cool. When he said in chat that he can power up Charizard up to like 7 times, I didn't believe until I saw this list. And I was like, wow, he actually can. So definitely scary in its own right. Kind of a meme in that respect. But I mean, like, honestly, Charizard EX can like pretty much plow through any big Pokemon in the active. So having that option, but he has some other tools too. Honestly, the Blaziken EX is really interesting to me. The fact that you can just do 100 damage anywhere on the bench, can make any like 2-shot play on whatever Pokemon feasible, as well as taking out powerful Pokemon. Like, I mean, even Quicksearch Pidgeot, as you can see, has 100 HP. So you can set up tons of plays with this kind of deck because you have so much access to energy with the Tyranitar and the Blaziken. Latios EX also just a great card to accelerate, so he can get such a good start going. He also has access to cards like Blacksmith to basically just he just keeps pushing. So I imagine this deck's gonna be super aggressive. He also has the reversals. I'd say I'm not really looking forward to playing this round against this round. So, but yeah, I definitely feel like this deck's a strong contender, and it's funny. I feel like last time he drafted a Blaziken deck, and I thought it was great. So he just did it again. So, leave it to Zach to draft Blaziken and do it well. So, looking forward to seeing it. Everyone else already talked about it, so I just continuing with their thoughts. So that's all I have to say about that deck. I'm gonna pass it right off to Mike.
All right. So I have Odysseus' Curse Stone deck. So this deck has Strong Energy, Shaman, and Curse Stone. I mean, what more do you need? Like, so this deck is it has a lot of like really good plays, and with Hariyama Curse Stone, Medicham Lock, Sand Slash Spreading, and then Gardevoir Delta is a really good card. So there's just a lot of like small little plays you can do with this deck that can give you the advantage over your opponent. And yeah, I just like how like tacky and like how many options you have with this deck. It's really cool to see with this cube how many options a lot of the decks have. And yeah, Brinies is really good. I always like to see that in these kind of decks like Gardevoir Delta, Brinies. That kind of stuff's really good. And yeah, I just really like the look of this deck, and it's already been talked about by I think one other person. So I have those thoughts as well, and I'll just pass it on to Slate.
Yeah, so my number 3 deck here is a deck that's been discussed quite a bit already, and that is Zach's deck. I don't have a ton to add to the conversation. I do think this deck has incredible resilience to outside forces just in general, with 2 DCE, Boost Energy, 2 VS Seeker, and Blacksmith. So many ways to get energy in play. It's absolutely terrifying. The only 2 things that I could really see this losing to are the thing that I did see it lose to round 1, and that was just narrowly. It was Power Lock can deal a bit of a blow to this, especially shutting off the Pidgeot, and if they can reset the hand, that's pretty scary. And then, so the Erasing Sound X-Cloud is very strong for shutting off weakness, and it will definitely give him a better shot against water than he otherwise would have. But I could still see an aggressive start from a water deck giving him quite a bit of trouble, especially if they're able to somehow disrupt him, or use something like Feraligatr EX to shut off those powers. That could be something very, very difficult for him to deal with. So, but otherwise, extremely well built, very well rounded deck, and I would be very surprised if this did not make it to a late stage of the event. So with that, I will pass it off to Zach.
All right. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Feraligatr EX. I was going to bring that up. It does shut off X-Cloud, which doesn't really help. So for my number 3 deck, I picked Quartz's Pumping Iron deck. So this is kind of the opposite of mine in many ways. It's a very tanky deck. So unlike any of the ones we've talked about with 1-hit KO potential, this is the opposite. You're not damaging it. You're not knocking it out. It's got a ton of ways to prevent damage. It has 2 special metal energy, which he can search out with the Furret, which I think is really good. He has an Eviolite, and then he has a couple of attacks which can prevent damage. So Deoxys can prevent 30s, but so if you think about it, you've got that, plus you have Eviolite, plus you have 2 metal on you. You're reducing 70 damage a turn. That's very good. The Armaldo EX heals itself. So it's kind of this thing where you're not really going to get damage, and then once you do, he has Big Malasade, he has 2 potions, he has Pokemon Breeder, so he can heal a lot of that off. Once you he's been doing that for a while. Then he's got some pretty big attacks that he can use with Steelix EX's Mudslide. Very good and just a very tanky Pokemon. Armaldo EX is a pretty solid attacker at 3 for 70 or 100 against a lot of things. And then Blastoise's Enraged Linear Attack, I feel, will get a lot of people. So say, you've gotten a Steelix EX up to 100 damage. Suddenly, out of nowhere, he can evolve that because of the dual type of Blastoise, and then snipe something on the bench for 100. So there's a lot of options with this deck, and just I could see a ton of decks just not being able to get around that. And if you are one of those decks that you don't have insane one-hit KO potential, or even if you do in some cases, just eventually I think this deck will be able to outlast them. And so it's a bit of a different way to win compared to the other decks we've been talking about, but I think it'll be a very effective one.
All right, so that round us out at our top 3. Starting from the left, we have Pack 1, Pick 1, Strong Energy, Crush Straw, Expensive Dot Deck, Curse Stone, also another expensive dot deck, and Pumping Iron. Something I wanted to bring up, because I remember when Davi was talking about it, maybe Davi can elaborate on it more. I feel like we see a lot more power-focused decks within this cube, and that's where it really makes stuff like Medicham and Slaking and Feraligatr really stand out. Davi, do you have anything else you want to say on that point, or anything you've seen as far as like those type of cards have gone in these decks that maybe they influence more of the top decks in this cube?
So I have some of my top rated decks as the lock ones, and I have some very strong opinions on them. There are some combos that are not possible on like normal evolution rules. Like, for example, evolving a Medicham and then using Brinies on it. That's disgusting. That's terrible. Like, that shouldn't be allowed. And I think that makes lock very, very strong in this cube. This is a Gen 3 cube, and so you have access to the cards like Kirsten. I think Cessation Crystals. I don't see it in the deck list, but like it's in the degeneration. So people are used to getting power locked, and I think if you came to this cube thinking that you just make a whatever power focus deck and power up your attacker and go, I think you're gonna have a bad time.
Yeah, definitely a good point. Anything else? Anything that anyone else wants to add to that, or have a different point?
One thing that I think is really important to consider in this cube as well, kind of an extension to the power focus or the power vulnerability, is some of the power decks that have the ability to just like knock out whatever is locking their powers. So Zach's deck can do that. There are some decks that are not in the top 5 that can do that as well. Off the top of my head, I'm blanking a little bit, but so anything with like Salamence EX Deoxys or Charizard EX or anything that can swing for like 100 120, being able to just like, okay, they put up a Medicham EX and lock you, and then you just one-shot it. And it becomes a lot less viable of a strategy if the opponent can do something immediately in response to out it. So I do like the power locking strategies a lot, but I don't want to understate the value of just a ton of damage in this cube and the ability to get to that damage without needing acceleration right off the bat. So things like double colorless energy, blacksmith, just any ways to get extra energy in play that don't necessarily require having another stage 2 or having some sort of dedicated accelerator. Those are all super powerful and kind of lesser respected ways to get out of lock, I think.
Yep, definitely well said. Anyone want to add to that, or we'll move on? All right, so we're getting to the final stretch here. Al, take it away with your number 2.
Okay, so my number 2 is Mike Gibbs' Curse Stone deck. So Curse Stone, it's a good card. Who would have thought? He's got the stadium now to find it as quickly as possible. He's got the Desert Ruins as well for punishing high HP EX Pokemon. He's got the Minun to bring back the Curse Stone. He's got the Crobat Delta species to trainer lock them to keep the Curse Stone in play. This deck will destroy decks that are reliant on powers, that have powers on their Pokemon, even if they don't care to use that power. a lot of basic Pokemon. Think the Dittos, the Deoxys. They're just sitting there with a power, and they're taking damage from Kirsten turn after turn. So that's really the focus of this deck. He's got the Weezing with the body odor for punishing Pokebodies as well. There's a lot of spread going on here. And Mike can just evolve out of his powers, the Milotic and the Ninetales. Once he's set up, basically, he can then just go into the Typhlosion, the Ludicolo. If one of his Ninetales or Milotic have taken damage from the powers, that's just powering up his Rage attack, which he can power very quickly with the Blacksmith. So that's a really cool combo. So yeah, I just think the deck's it's different. It's really just trying to show how broken Kirsten can be. And I think as long as it hits matchups that are power reliant, it shouldn't have any trouble beating them. So I'll pass it to Davi.
Thank you. So I have Kirsten, Sean's deck, Odysseus deck. Funny story, I was sitting beside Odysseus in the draft. So some of his best cards in his deck, like some of the cards that would absolutely break his deck, I hate drafted, like many DCs and the other Kirsten. But I still think this deck is completely bonkers. Gardevoir Delta species is one of the best attackers in the cube. It actually works the same way as Typhlosion works, that Paul just said. You can just let your Espion get damaged on the bench, and when you want, you can evolve and Psychic Rage something in the bench for tons and tons of damage. And this deck has crazy recursion. It has very good special energy in the deck. Like, the attackers are so good. And the thing that I said, you can evolve Medicham EX and like Briny with the Meganium, and you can use like 2 very good effects on that. Or like 3. You're recovering your Medicham, you're using evolutionary something, I don't remember the name of Meganium's power, and you're putting it back on the hand. So like you can just use that Medicham forever and ever. And that's a Medicham with a strong energy, by the way. This deck is just insane. I tested against it a few times, and I gotta say this deck is super strong. I think it's gonna go very high on the league. And I think that's it for me, and passing to Grover.
Thanks, Abby. So my number 2 is Best Owl's Green Lemon deck. I thought this deck was really cool. I really like what he can do with the Gyro Ball attack as being able to hit and run. I think that Luxray is actually really solid, especially with the U-turn board. We saw that kind of in last league with the Como being able to discard a tool. I mean, the Luxray can do similar things. And it's just so many good aspects of this deck. I feel like he has a lot of different like means of operation. He also has access to Manectric EX, which is a very strong stage 1, being able to use Disconnect as well as Mega Shot to snipe things on the bench. Flutter Wings is an insane support. The fact he has Flutter Wings and Sunflora, as well as the Turf Field Stadium, makes his getting up his support line very, very useful. As well as he has really good pivot options for the hit and run. He's got the Muck EX to lack powers. He's got the Vileplume EX to lack trainers. Vileplume EX with the Crystal Beach can be probably super annoying for any DC heavy decks, which we just talked about a ton of them. So I feel like this deck has a ton of options. I definitely think he's got a really good shot at going all the way with it. I'm really excited to see where he goes with it. So that said, I'm going to pass it off to Mike.
All right, I have a JL deck, which I think is super good. Was like the biggest thing in this deck is probably the Crota that can just discard energy. That's super good. With the Devo Spray and like Seeker and stuff, you can discard a lot of energy in a game. And with Curstone and just there's a lot of recovery options in this deck to just use Crawdon or even Umbreon EX, which is just like Luxray GLX, like just Gus. I think this deck is really good at just abusing a lot of really good powers. Yeah, I think the damage output is very good also. I just see this deck is very disruptive and can play a lot of different ways to counter the opponent's playstyle. And I think there's a lot of like cool plays, and like Double Enhanced Hammer can just ruin some decks. So I'm excited to see where this deck goes, and yeah, I'm just going to pass it on to Slate.
All right, so my number 2 deck here is Odysseus's Cursed Stone deck. So I don't have a lot to add about this deck. I just want to say that it has insane... So 2 things in this cube that I think are critically important to having an extremely successful deck are overall card quality, and I'm talking about every single stage of a line, not just at the stage 2, and aggressive potential. So this deck has both of those things in extreme capacity. So it has Clefable EX, which this deck would normally be fairly vulnerable to things like Salamence maybe, but Clefable EX just one-shots Salamence, and it's hard to one-shot in response. Medicham and Hariyama EX, two of the most powerful aggressive stage 1s in the cube. Very easy to evolve out of as well to deny prizes or use things like Brinies. Very nice stage 2s in Meganium and Kingdra EX, and the Gardevoir Delta is just such a powerful attacker as well. It's really just like an all-stars list of the Pokemon in the cube, at least in his types, and it's just so well built. I also really love the double Ruins of Alph. People in this cube are not paying enough respect to resistance, and it is everywhere. I have seen a lot of decks that don't really account for the possibility of getting resisted, and they are significantly worse off for it. If they hit certain matchups, they probably won't be able to succeed. Odysseus recognized that, and he is absolutely not going to take any losses to that. And overall, this deck is just incredible. I would not be surprised to see it take the league at all. And with that, I will pass it to Zach.
All right, so for my number 2 pick, I also have Odysseus' Cursed Stone. I actually lost to this in round 1, and so I can say that Davi's description of it is completely bonkers, is accurate. It's another one of those decks that just has multiple ways to win too. So like against me, how he was able to end up winning in game 3 was he locked my powers out with Medicham, and then when I knocked out his Medicham, he recovered his Medicham and put it back into play, and then he did that again for a third time, and then when I almost got that one knocked out, he evolved and Brinies'd it. So like you can just do that over and over. So any power reliant deck, he can crush between just having them off of powers the entire time and having Cursed Stone in play. But then he also has other ways. So like in our second game, I was getting it kind of slow, but his thing there was just having a giant Kingdra EX with Espeon and just completely being able to out tank while doing a ton of damage at the same time. And then, so if you need to, he can, focus on Kingdra and Meganium and play a tanky strategy. He can hit very hard with his fighting types, and then Nidoqueen and Gardevoir are both great. If you have an attack that can potentially one-hit KO him, he can always threaten Clefable EX on you to just get a return KO right back. And so there's just so much going for this deck that, like Slight said, I would not be surprised at all if it ended up winning the entire league.
All right, so after we've had here at number 2, starting with Al, we have Cursed Stone deck, Cursed Stone, Green Lemon, Not Control, Cursed Stone, Cursed Stone. A lot of these players self-titled their decks, so it's funny we've said Cursed Stone a lot, but I feel like Cursed Stone hasn't really been that much of the conversation. It is definitely a known presence here, but I don't know if anybody wants to speak to this, but I feel like more of the locking aspects have been the bigger aspect of this. I guess the Cursed Stone does punish the Poke Powers, but anything you guys are seeing in terms of like patterns with these decks that you want to point out?
Well, I see a lot of successful Cursed Stone decks.
Yeah, it's definitely true.
No, but I mean, we've talked about it a bunch on the podcast. Card's just insane, and some of the decks here are poised to use it phenomenally, especially against all of the decks that are power reliant in this cube. One thing that I do want to bring up about Odysseus' deck, if he had a DCE or 2, number 1 deck for sure. The lack of even a single double colorless energy is a pretty big downside for that deck because he's basically just attaching once per turn. He does have the energy jump with the Gardevoir and Briny, so he's not totally without acceleration, but it doesn't synergize well with Medicham. Well, I guess he can evolve out of it, so it does synergize fine with Medicham.
He can attach to Regirock, power it up, and then just evolve right away too.
Yeah, so he has options.
But yeah.
But 1 DCE even, 2 would be the dream, but 1 DCE would be a tremendous asset to this deck. So I have to say that is probably the only thing keeping it from my number 1 spot.
Sorry, Sean.
Yeah, all those TCs went into the Dobby Void, so unfortunately he wasn't able to get his hands on any. But maybe that's good for all of us. That maybe Dobby's out here doing, he's the people's champion,
Yep.
keeping it all fair and balanced. Anything else before we move forward?
I actually do have something that I just thought of. It's a comment to JL and Mike, the cube owners. Usually, when you're building a cube, because it's most cube on Pokemon are not mutant, you're kind of trapped into like, okay, my fighting line either has to be like super energy not reliant, like few energy attachments, or super strong, hitting a lot of numbers. And in this cube, I think it's because it's mutant, you can make a type do a bunch of stuff. So dark is the one that I'm pretty interested about because there are some dark decks that are super aggressive, like Blue's deck, and there are some dark decks that are super defensive, controlly, and annoying, like JL's deck. And I just now realized that that's some very good deck cube building for you two. Congratulations.
Yep, hats off to JL
Nice.
and Mike Gibbs for doing such a good job with this queue. I know a lot of people, including myself, have had a great time drafting it. So even more excited now to play our games. So anything else before we move on to the last picks? All right, so Best Buy Al, take it away with your number 1.
All right, so I've chosen JL's Not a Control deck for my number 1. I think I chose JL's Empoleon deck as my number 1 for the last league, and he ended up winning that. So I'm picking him again. I see the potential in Dark Tyranitar for this deck. I think that's the focal point. Perhaps going in with Valplume EX early to slow them down with the trainer lock. But if you can ever get in a position where he uses Umbreon EX to gust something, then he can Crawdaunt, discard an energy from it. He can Brinies the Crawdaunt. If he's got a Murkrow, he can then play the Crawdaunt again on the same turn, effectively discarding 2 energy in 1 turn. He's got the E-Hammers. He's got the Devo Spray, so he can play the Crawdaunt again. Just an insane amount of trapping potential in this deck. He's got the Ace Trainer, so if he's ever behind, which might actually be the goal, fall behind so you can Ace Trainer them to 3. Pull off this sort of trap with the Umbreon, the energy discarding, and then go in with the Tyranitar EX and start hitting 20 damage to all of your opponent's Pokemon. If you manage to get that off for 2 or 3 turns, chances are the game's just over. That is so much damage with your opponent not really having much in a way to retaliate because they're just trapped with something. So I think it's definitely a difficult deck to play around. He's also got the Sableye with the Junk Hunt and the Power Hand extension. So that's another way where he can be recycling Gusting and even just recycling De-Evolution Spray to play that Crawdaunt over and over again. It's a nightmare to play against. He's got the Grimsleeve for damage counter manipulation, a good support line with the Porygon 2. He's got Kirsten, which we've talked about a lot, but he's got Dark Porygon 2 to bring that back if he needs to. So yeah, I just think the deck's just really unique in what it does, but I think it does it really well. So I'll pass to Davy.
Okay, let's talk about Kirsten. The deck is 2. That's it. This deck is super strong. Many of the basics in this cube have powers just because they're useful, like the Dittos or the Shamans or the Deoxys. And like, if this deck has a turn 1 Kirsten, like Muck, turn 2 Kirsten Crobat, that's game over basically. You're not setting up. Like, you're passing to evolve, then you're evolving, you're attack, you're dead. It doesn't matter. This is amazing. This deck is amazing. I don't really like the supporter quality. Like there's Professor Birch and Field Worker in the deck. That's I think just what you do when you get Kirsten in such a high priority. But I really like the attackers in this deck. Muk turn 2, both the Muks are super strong. Poison Ring is such a good card. Only for 2 attachments, 30 damage, and can't retreat. That's not the not retreating part is not really useful in Mutant because you usually just evolve and retreat anyway. But just the rest of the deck is so solid. This Ludicolo, it seems like a okay card, but it's so good. He can get into some situations of like locking powers and locking trainers and staying in play and just knocking off stuff from the hand and just getting an advantage from so early in the game. And this is Mike Gibbs playing Kirsten. This is not the first time. It's not my first time putting Mike Gibbs playing Kirsten in the first on my picks. So I just trust him that he will go far with this deck. And yep, passing to Grover.
All right. I am so excited to talk about JL's not a control deck. Because I remember a conversation came up in the Discord where he talked about how he Brinies a Crawdad and then evolved it. And like that doesn't seem like much, but that leads into so many different plays. Like he's got so many potentials. Like the fact that he can just Brinies off like a Tyranitar EX or a Dark Tyranitar, and then evolve it right into Crawdad and take energy off. Denying prices, take energy off the board, sitting there, putting it back. He also has access to Vaporeon EX too. He has like some of the best support in the cube. I think this deck is just a monster house. I'm a huge fan of definitely just having like the Vileplume EX as an option to just lock Kirsten into play. Because he doesn't have to play around all the powers. He also just has options on top of options. Because he's got so much gust potential, just what you want in a cube. He's got so much like recovery options. He also has the Stable Eye to cover back important resources. Like he's got pretty much ways he wants to play out any matchup. He has a lot of different ways he can do it. So as long as he's like planning in advance for how he wants to approach his games, I think he could definitely win this tournament pretty heavy-handedly. He won the last Cube League as well, so we've seen him do it before. I wouldn't be surprised to see this definitely in top 8. But I think a lot of his opponents are going to have to play really smart against this deck. But yeah, this is definitely my front runner in the entire league. That's it. I'm going to pass it off to Mike Gibbs.
All right, so I have Mysterious Players discard a card, draw 6 deck. So every game he'll set up Space Beacon, Roast Reveal, and Delcatty, and then he'll just discard a card from his hand and then just draw 6. It's so good. Like he'll have these huge hands. I could see a problem with this deck is against Holland's engines where they just scientists and also gain the advantage. But I think this deck is super solid. It will pretty much get his game plan going in almost every game. And there's like a lot of like really good attacks, like this Vaporeon to punish like people benefiting off his hand size. So there's just I could see this deck having problems with like power locking and curse stone, but I don't think it's that big of a deal. Testing against him, I don't think it was like he can definitely still win. I think like this deck is super solid and it has so many different plays it can make. And it can draw whatever it wants almost every turn in the game. And with the Fire Starter and the Swampert, he can excel. So I don't really see very many weaknesses in this deck, and I think this deck can go very far. And with that, I'll pass over to Slate.
All right. So for my number 1, I have the same deck, Mysterious Players Energy Draw deck. I did most of my testing for the league against it, and I lost every single time. So there's a reason why this deck is number 1 on power rankings and my deck isn't even here. But Mysterious Player has built this deck in such a way that it is terrifying. The Kingdra EX actually is the card that I want to draw the most attention to because I did not give it enough respect in drafting or really even in analyzing the lists until I actually played against it. The ability for him to evolve off of the Rayquaza Delta or the Vaporeon EX into Kingdra EX and deal 1 for 60 while he sets up other stuff is so good. It's like absolutely ridiculous, the efficiency of that attack on the body that it has. 150 HP is so high. So it's just nuts. And his the Starmie in tandem with the Roast Reveal Ninetales with the Energy Draw just ensures that his draws stay super smooth. Vaporeon Star is a card that we've really not talked about, I think, at all in the video. And it's just nuts. The ability to bench Vaporeon when it benefits you the most, heal a condition, heal 30 damage, that literally will auto-win certain situations against grass decks if they're banking on like paralysis sticking for a turn. Just search out Vaporeon, bench it, and the paralysis is gone, and he probably takes a one-shot. So this deck is so extremely terrifying. It's very fast, very consistent, and I would not be surprised to see him take down the league with it. And with that, I will pass it to Zach.
All right. So for my number 1 pick, I have Best Pal Owl's deck. This deck I think is really, really good. It's another one of those decks that just has a ton of different options and ways to win. I think you can go, very hard hitting. I think someone mentioned earlier how hard of an attacker Luxray is, especially with the U-turn board. Just being able to do 100 every turn with no downside is very good. The double energy acceleration, I love. It makes it very easy to, go between attackers, and that's even if we just ignore the fact that there's energy trans in this deck. Uh, so pretty much everything should get powered up very quickly. And then he also has very good locking options with Mucky X, which you can potentially get out turn 1 with Caterpie, Manectric EX, and Vileplume EX. The real reason I think this deck is probably my number 1 pick is special conditions. Like, looking through a lot of the decks in this cube, I didn't see a ton that really have good ways to switch out a Vileplume EX using Special Formula, or Venusaur EX using Pollen Hazard, or Beedrill using Needle Shock. So just over time, I think those could, consistently annoy an opponent. And if you run out of that quickly, then that's a huge advantage, especially with confusion. You flip some tails, or you get knocked out going back into his turn, and it happens again. So just, I think that's going to give this deck a huge advantage in this cube in particular. But overall, it's just got so many options. It's fast, it's consistent, and there's a lot of ways that I think it will win, which is why it is my number 1 deck choice.
Yep, definitely good point. So we have the final list here of all of our top 5s. Starting for number 1 for the Owl, we have Not Control, JL, Kirsten, that deck from Mike Gibbs. Not Control again with JL, Energy Draw, and then Green Lemon. So right before we get into the final results, the aggregate rankings, any surprise picks from anybody that you were surprised about? Any decks that maybe you're thinking were better than maybe you're giving it credit for? I probably undervalued Mysterious Player's deck. I think he had a very I didn't realize how much draw he had. I wasn't really considering the Starmie and drawing him all those cards at the same time. So shout out to him there. Anyone else have any other thoughts before we get into the aggregate rankings?
Happy to see all the variety.
Go ahead.
Oh, just a very short comment. I was happy to see all the variety with this list. We have a lot of different decks on here. Actually, exactly half of the decks in the event are on the list right now. And there are actually some decks that I was considering for this that we didn't even talk about. So overall, just really, really cool, and a lot of good decks built this league.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some decks here I did not consider to be as good as they are. Like 1 or 2 cards when you see the list, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, this deck's really good. But that just speaks on the quality of deck building that we have on the server, and just the quality of the cube by itself. So yeah, the decks are amazing this time around.
Just one other thing I find very amusing is how many of these number 1 decks, like half of us didn't even pick some of them, like in our top 5 at all. It just really speaks to how, diverse the selections were this time and how good the decks were, I think.
Yeah, that was something I was thinking too, is that like some of these decks that are even on the number 1, like Mike Gibbs doesn't even pop up in some of our lists, but he obviously has really good deck. There's just so many good decks to choose from. I know I was struggling. There was like maybe 10 that could have been easily in my top 5, but I had to draw the line somewhere. I think other people probably experienced similar things. So definitely attributed to, I think, also how much the Cube Discord has grown too. I think we've seen continuous growth from pretty much all players who participate. So hats off to all the players out there. I think I'm very excited to see how the games play out in this league.
I think an interesting note about all these lists too is they kind of reflect what some of the builders value in decks. So like in this queue, I value aggressive decks very, very highly. And so the only deck that isn't a conventionally aggressive deck is Zax. And it can still get off to very aggressive starts. Whereas Mike has like a lot of decks with very powerful control elements. So it's just kind of shows you, I think the decks are so good that it ultimately just ends up reflecting what we as drafters and deck builders value in this queue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's one of the good things that Cube brings to the table, is that there's a lot of how you play kind of comes into it, and a lot of how you approach it. So whether it's a bias or not, I think it honestly, reflects more of the person than it does anything else. I think that's really cool. Any final thoughts before we move on to our final ranking?
Nope.
All right, so a drum roll, please. Our aggregate rankings. But, Odysseus at number 1, following by Zach Crickler at expensive.deck. Best Pals Green Lemon at number 3, Not Control at number 4, and then Energy Doll at number 5. I think all of these decks are going to be. I mean, if this was like part of the top 8, I mean, and it very well probably will be. Not to jinx anybody, but like that was going to be insanely hard to get through. Like this bracket's going to be nuts, no matter who's in there. Because I feel like there's so many good decks. Any thoughts in general on these decks, or anything anyone wants to say?
Gotta say, aggregate ranking, picking match results like a champion. Odysseus did beat Zach in round 1, and while we've been streaming this, JL beat Mysterious Player. Aggregate rankings really on top of the prediction game.
They're making me feel a little better about losing that round 1. Like if it's the only other ranked above it.
This is called results-based analysis.
It's the method to the madness, right?
I find it really funny that I only picked one of these decks on the final rankings. Oops.
Bobby's over here with the hot takes. That's what I'm hearing. But yeah, I think that's gonna wrap us up here. If you want to see these lists, you can actually find them on our Twitter. Both are actually posted right now in case you want to reference them later. And like I said before in the beginning, make sure to follow us on Twitter. There's going to be a lot more Cube League oriented content coming through the pipeline that you don't want to miss, especially about the league and about the decks we're seeing. So can't necessarily keep you all the updates like during our videos. So definitely gonna try to at least get as much information out there as possible because it's a really exciting league that we want to share and talk about. And if you're available tomorrow around 12 p.m. Central, we are going to be streaming with the same company in addition to Sean Adam, Odysseus, who actually is our number 1 on the final rankings, and Omnipoke, drafting one of the craziest cubes we've ever seen before. So that should be a fun time. But I think that's going to wrap it up for us. So if you've been watching, thank you so much. If you're watching on YouTube and the VOD, definitely leave us a comment on what deck you were excited about and what deck maybe caught your eye. But that's going to wrap it up, and we'll see you guys next time.